Welcome back, everybody, to our studies in the philosophy of mind. The previous lesson took an introduction to the subject of dualism, the first of our major sort of collection of philosophical theories, if you will, in relation to examining the distinction between the mind and the body, the mental and the physical, or maybe even thinking about the interaction between the mental and the physical. And what we did in the previous lesson was distinguished the idea of dualism in its sort of broadest form from that of the sort of monism theories, which are theories that posit either one or the other in relation to mental or physical. So the idea that everything is just physical is an idea that is posited by physicalism, hence the name. The idea that everything is just mental is the idea that we see in the works of idealists and idealism. This lesson is going to talk about substance dualism in more detail. We introduced substance dualism in the previous lesson. We looked at René Descartes, for example. We looked mainly at just what René Descartes believed, okay, and what he actually said. But we didn't actually come to any conclusions or some posits as to why he thinks those things and what the arguments are for substance dualism. That's what this lesson is going to essentially examine. We're going to examine why you would be a substance dualist. What are the rationales behind the instigation of substance dualism, the support for substance dualism, and why Descartes, a philosopher who is very well renowned, came to the conclusion that he did with regard to substance dualism. So, in the previous lesson, like I said, we took an introduction to substance dualism. We're going to look at it in more detail here. And as a basic recap then, we know from the previous lesson that substance dualism, sometimes also attributed specifically to Descartes as Cartesian dualism, is the view that reality is composed of two distinct types of substances. Simple as that. There is firstly the mind, the idea of the non-physical, the thinking substances. These are which identified by Descartes as like the soul or the mind specifically. The essence of the thinking substances, the essence of mental substances, according to Descartes, is the idea of thought, the idea of thinking, the idea of reasoning or doubting, the idea of imagining, willing or feeling. These are all things that a mind, the mental substances, do in relation to their impact on us as humans, us as persons, us as things that have a certain degree of existence. By contrast, the body is the physical extended representation of the person, the extended representation of a substance. They are defined by their occupation in space as well as their persistence in time. They are subjected to mechanical laws, the laws of physics, the laws of mechanics. They are essentially represented by their essence as extension, taking up space, having dimensions, being divisible, being measurable physically. These two substances are radically different in nature, but one of the things that Descartes, in quite a lot of ways, struggled to try and reconcile was the fact that these are nevertheless substances which interact with each other in some meaningful way. This is the essence of this idea of Cartesian dualism as represented here. So let's get on then. Let's get on and think about this in more detail then. So the distinction between the mind and the body. Okay, let's think about this. Descartes famously argued that the mind and the body are distinct entities and that they have different properties. This is one of the most famous things that Descartes did. Something that if you are somebody who has not studied philosophy before, will probably still nevertheless be familiar with this idea. He noted that the body is material. It extends in space, it is subjected to the laws of physics, and the mind is immaterial. It is not subjected to physical laws. It is not measurable in the same kind of way as the body can be measurable by basic scientific empiricism. Now, the way in which Descartes came to this conclusion was to ground his argument in what is known as radical doubt, Descartes' method of radical doubt, sometimes known as methodological skepticism, or just Cartesian skepticism. This was a sort of thought experiment that Descartes engaged himself with. Essentially, in his Meditations on First Philosophy, Descartes sought to try and become a skeptic, to doubt everything that could be doubted, in an effort to try and find the kind of undoubtable, the undubitable foundation for knowledge. He essentially came to the conclusion that you can doubt everything. I can doubt my own existence. I can doubt the existence of the things that are around me. I could be a brain in a vat, for example. All of these are things that I could do. Is there a point at which we keep digging and digging and digging to the point where we get to some kind of bedrock, where there is a thing that we can know, that we know for sure without ever needing to be skeptical about it? Okay, that is what this idea of radical doubt or methodological skepticism seeks to achieve. He arrives at his famous conclusion. His famous conclusion is cogito ergo sum. This is the conclusion of I think, therefore I am. Essentially, what he is suggesting here is that everything can be doubted, but the fact that he is thinking about this, the fact that he is even thinking about doubting everything, means that there has to be something that is thinking. And that thing that has to be thinking is himself, okay? So he can doubt as everything that he wants, but what he cannot doubt, okay, is that he is thinking about doubting, okay? That is tautologically impossible. It doesn't make sense. If I'm going to sit here and doubt and be skeptical about everything, I'm going to doubt the existence of everything, that means that I'm doing something. I'm doubting the existence of everything. And so in order to do that, I have to think. And in order to think requires a thinker. To think requires something that exists somewhere that can think. Okay, and therefore, because something has to exist in order to think, I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum. Now that doesn't get us any closer to giving us the existence of us as human beings, as physical entities, okay? Because what he is saying here is that he thinks, therefore he is, but he could still be a brain in a vat. The only thing that he can conclusively come to the determination of is that he can think, that something is thinking, all right? So he uses this realization to argue that the mind, the idea of the thinking thing, is distinct from the body. And the reason why he makes that conclusion is that he cannot doubt the existence of the mind, because the mind is thinking, and he is thinking as a thinking thing, and in order to think, he has to be a thinker. So all of these things sort of conclude with the basic premise of cogito ergo sum. But he can doubt his physical existence. He can doubt his physical existence because he could be dreaming. He could be a brain in a vat. He could be in a simulation, theoretically. And so all of those things are doubtable quite easily with subjected to sensory deception and all these different kinds of things. So there's one part of him that is his mind that he knows for sure exists, okay, because he thinks, therefore he is. But the physical part of him, he doesn't know for sure exists. He could doubt that. He could be radically skeptical about his own existence. Like I said, it could be a thinking mind in a vat. He could be an ethereal concept, and that his mind is simulating this entire reality around him. The pain that he feels when he stubs his toe, or the heat that he feels when he drinks a hot coffee, okay, could all just be part of his mind. So what he says here is, if there is some kind of physical existence, if I can assume, if I go back a little bit and come back up from bedrock, and I make an assumption that there is a physical existence, because one is doubtable and the other one is not, they must be distinct things. There must be a distinction between the body that is doubtable and subjected to sensory deception and the mind which is not. That is what we get to when we think about a conclusion for substance dualism, why he believes that there is a distinction between mind and body. Another thing that could be noted here is this idea of indivisibility. So, according to Descartes, the body is divisible. This is very simple. You could lose a limb, you could lose an arm, you could lose your head, you could cut yourself up into an infinite collection of different items. You could atomize yourself all the way down to the subatomic particle, to which you're just a soup of quarks and electrons. That is theoretically possible. I doubt it would be very pleasant, but that is something that you could do. Okay, it is divisible. But the mind is not, according to Descartes. The mind cannot be divided. This indivisibility is also a key argument for why the mind has to be a distinct substance from the body. And he's making all these claims, and he's sort of relying on our intuition that we go, well, because they are behaving so differently, because the mind is indivisible, because the mind cannot be doubted, because the body is divisible, because the body is doubtable in terms of its existence. All of these things means that they are separate entities. They are behaving in different ways. They have completely different properties. So they have to be completely different things. Thoughts and experiences are unified. They do not occupy space, whereas physical objects, and like bodies, can be broken into distinct parts. So that's the argument for at least Descartes' perception for why substance dualism exists, or is real, or is correct. Descartes also argued that he could doubt the existence of his body in the external world, but not doubt the existence of his mind. So this is part of the cogito ergo sum argumentation. Now, Descartes claimed that he could clearly and distinctly conceive of himself existing without a body. This is something that you can do. You can exist. Theoretically, you could close your eyes and you can imagine yourself as a brain in a vat, or you could imagine yourself as a simulation. Okay, you can imagine yourself as a mental, just a mental state, a mind that is floating through the universe and that is having all of these radical dreams and simulations and experiences. You could imagine an afterlife in which the mind or the soul exists independently of the body, which is obviously what Descartes did. He was a very staunchly religious individual. But it's not conceivable for you to exist without the mind. That is a completely different thing, okay? I can conceive of a mind without the body. I can conceive of myself existing without my bodily physical nature. But I can't conceive of my body without the mind. How can I exist? How can I conceive of myself as something without the mind? That doesn't seem to make sense. How can I conceive myself as not having a mind? There are two sort of lines of argumentation here. This firstly ties back to this idea that the mind exists sort of a priori. It exists as part of his sort of general thought experiment that concludes, I think, therefore I am. But it also supports this idea of there being a distinction between the mind and the body. Okay, it must be possible that they are distinct substances if we make that particular point. As mentioned earlier again as well, Descartes argued that the mind is indivisible while the body is divisible. Since divisible things cannot be identical to indivisible things, the body and the mind must therefore be distinct kinds of substances. So, all quite strong conclusions, all quite strong arguments that seems to draw us to the perception that, well, it must be the case that the mind and the body are distinct substances. What we'll do in the next lesson is explain some of the counter-arguments, some of the contemporary counter-arguments and some of the more modern counter-arguments that Descartes didn't have a time to respond to, and see why substance dualism isn't quite what it shakes up to be. Well, it's not quite as good as you might think. Well, we'll do all of that in the next lesson.